Concerns about the impact of technology on learning and on provision of education are not new. Only this morning, an article from the Times Higher Education supplement appeared in my inbox, which began with a reference to Socrates and the concerns of the Theban king Thamus that invention of writing would damage learning by making us forgetful and prone to showing wisdom without the reality of deep thought. The increase in use of digital technology during the pandemic has tested the ability of legislation such as GDPR to prevent the invasion of privacy and the gathering of data to power algorithms that risk turning us into the Pavlovian dogs of the digital age, according to recent contributors to Academia Letters. On the other hand, improving the ease and speed of access to research can promote equity and help in solving what is often called the last mile problem of enabling practitioners to benefit from engaging with evidence and insights from research to inform their practice. Teachers' professional growth can be understood as a dynamic relationship between evidence and experience, in which research, understood as both enquiry, engaging with existing research to develop a deeper understanding of a problem, and inquiry, engaging in research themselves to identify and frame the factors in a problematic situation. Those of you familiar with the work of John Dewey will see the influence of my pragmatist approach to understanding teachers' professional learning in that distinction between enquiring, finding out what other people know, and inquiry, searching more deeply into one's own experience. In this presentation, I'm focusing on how teachers engage with research, how they engage with existing research conducted by other people, often researchers in universities, and on the use of social media as the means of accessing research. This slide shows the analysis by the OECD in their recent report on policies to support teachers continuing professional learning, based on a mapping of their data and proposing a conceptual framework. You can see that in this table, the focus of my talk now is captured there in exchange on online platforms, highlighted in red. And this is categorized in their framework as less formal and as private, and forms one element in a range of activities. One question for us to consider is the extent to which social media, as one of those platforms, is in fact as informal and as private as the OECD model suggests. The General Teaching Council Scotland is a strong advocate of teachers taking control of their own professional learning and supports both engagement in and with research. They are also aware of the need to approach the use of social media by teachers with caution. The questions here are, as you can see, are mainly focused on the risk of broaching personal private boundaries and bringing the profession into disrepute. And we're probably all familiar with examples where that crossing over between what people assume is a private communication, but conducted on social media, is a very public activity, in fact. And there's no shortage of examples of how this has damaged individuals. And teachers are particularly vulnerable to such a broach between the personal, private, and the professional boundaries. But I think we can also see in these questions that there are implications for the accessing and sharing of research using social media. How informal and how private can and should such sharing as an activity be? Where is the control? And thinking of the algorithms that drive interactions through such media, and the Pavlovian dog analogy that I referred to at the beginning of this talk, we can see that this is actually quite complex. The impact of digital technology, artificial intelligence, and big data on the professions, as in most areas of life, brings advantages and disadvantages, as all our experiences during this pandemic have shown. In fact, it's hard to imagine how different life would have been without access to technology, AI, and big data. Understanding the costs and benefits matters to us all, as it has consequences for knowledge creation, translation, and use. And my interest in exploring social media and its use by teachers to access research stems from the interest I've had throughout my career, as outlined in the introduction, about the interaction of theory and practice in professional learning and the role of partnerships between teachers working in schools and academics working in universities. So it's a concern and a fascination I've had throughout my career. So how is knowledge created? How is it translated? And how is it used? The two papers here represent aspects to be considered from the rapidly growing body of research on which we can all draw. So I've literally just picked out two references and the things that they say about the affordances, the benefits, the advantages of using digital technology and social media. The idea that it's speedy and easy to access, and it can be used by most and many teachers. And the idea that that actually has given power to teachers to take control of their professional learning. In fact, some people talk about the benefits of using social media to access research. They say, well, this is professional development in my own time, on my own terms. However, Rensfeldt et al. Point to some of the issues to be considered. Yes, there are benefits, but in my own time means that this is often time outside your day job. It's actually creating more work for teachers, taking responsibility for your own professional development. Does this mean that your employer is not taking as much responsibility for your professional development? And Rensfeldt talk about digital labour, actually increasing the amount of work, whether you're engaging with social media, whether you're sharing things through social media. Yes, you are in control, algorithms permitting, of course, but you are engaging in more digital labour. The other issue is linked to the fact that you're using platforms which exist for commercial purposes. And this means that within them are drivers to commercialize exchanges. And it's a cliche, but one that's true. If something in the digital technology world, if something is free, then you are the product. So your engagement through social media is driving things which are pushing things towards you, which are commercializing the exchanges that take place through social media. So which access is available? Which research is available, rather, through this access? And what is being pushed towards you, and who by, and for what purposes? And we see that there's a predominance of individualized, reputation-driven behaviors. So people who are basically influencers. We're familiar with the idea of influencers on social media in terms of fashion or music or other products. But if you think about research as a product, then who are the influencers who are actually pointing us through their interactions on social media towards certain ideas, certain research? So there are things to be considered in both regards. So what should we consider regarding teachers' access to research? What I won't have time to go into in this keynote is another perhaps bigger underlying issue is about how teachers think and conceptualize research. What do they think research is? What counts as research? And that's a whole fascinating area in itself, and one that the work I'm going to go on and talk about in a minute will help us perhaps to pursue further. So what should we consider in terms of teachers' access to research? Trying to explain the strange world of the academic to my teacher colleagues is something which often can be amusing, if not thought-provoking. As I said, I've always been interested in looking at how schools and universities work together in partnership to promote and develop knowledge to inform teaching. And for many years, I worked closely with a colleague who was a deputy head teacher of a school, Marie Butterworth. And we wrote articles together, we worked on projects together. And I can remember very early on when we started writing about our work, the first article we wrote was for a teacher's professional publication. And we were paid by the publication to write the piece for them. And it was a very supportive and encouraging process, which Marie, as a new writer about research, enjoyed and found very supportive, as I said. We then went on to write an article for an academic journal. And that provoked an interesting conversation when I was explaining to Marie how the world of academia works. And it's very much like in this cartoon. So we write the article and we send it to the journal, but they don't pay us to write the article. No, they don't pay us, we write it. Then it's reviewed by other academics. Do they get paid? No, they don't get paid either. Then it's actually, if we're fortunate, it's published in the journal. But actually, Marie couldn't access the journal because she couldn't get beyond the firewall of subscribing to the journal. And when she learnt how much it costs academic university libraries to subscribe to journals, she was pretty shocked. She said, so you're writing articles for nothing to be published in journals, which then cost you a lot of money to be able to read? And I said, yeah, that's pretty much how it works. So I want to ground my observations for this presentation on a recently completed research project, the Teachers as Researchers project, which was funded by a charity, the Culham St Gabriel's Trust. And this is a trust that funds a lot of research aimed at improving teaching and learning in a particular subject area in religious education. And they wanted to explore in more detail what kinds of research do teachers engage in, and how do they access it. And so we conducted this project. The project had 3 phases, and this is what I've shown on this slide. So the first phase was to actually do something which we need to do more of in education research, which is to combat what I've called academic amnesia, the fact that there is a lot of work that is forgotten or not accessed by academics, never mind by teachers. So the first question is, what do we already know about teachers' access to research? Let's start there. Let's not start with a blank slate. What do we already know? And so the first phase was a mapping review of published research in the last 10 years that looked at how do teachers engage with research. The second phase was to, okay, this is teachers in general. Let's look at the teachers that the trust were particularly interested in, which is the teachers of religious education. So to explore the implications for those teachers, what is their experience? We conducted semi-structured interviews and analysed those to see what their experience was. And then the third phase is to bring those 2 things together to identify opportunities and pitfalls and enable best use of limited resources to improve the access of teachers to research. There isn't time here to go into detail about the mapping review phase. The report is available if you are interested and forms in itself quite a useful resource of what has been researched and what the main characteristics are of recent research on teachers' engagement with research. But this figure is a Prisma flowchart. Those of you familiar with literature reviews will know this chart. This is where you record the process in as transparent a way as possible so that other people can see how you actually conducted the review. And what you can see here really, and that's why I've included the slide, is the scale of the task. And how the filtering, you start off, if you do keyword searching, you start off with over 17,000 published research studies that appear from their titles and abstracts to be concerned with the issue that one was interested in finding out about. But actually, as you go through the process, you end up with 155 studies which are actually addressing the key question that you thought 17,000 were actually concerned with. And it just shows you how you can't rely on titles and abstracts to give an accurate picture of what the article is about. And there are issues around, even if you can access published research, there are issues about the way that they're written and that make it quite tricky to filter your way through. So in itself, an indicator of access to research issues. And I could go on about how we need to improve practice, not just in making research that's published in academic journals accessible by having more open access, but actually making sure that the way that we write means that what we say is accessible and that the article actually does what it says it does in the title and the abstract. And in fact, there are some academic disciplines, which I'm very strict about how you title and what you put in your abstract and how you keyword. And maybe that's something, as an editor of educational research journals in the past, we could perhaps do better than we do at the moment. So the first phase was to say, well, what do we already know about teachers and their access to research? And so what did we see? Now, there's a health warning here, because actually extracting key points from a literature review, particularly a mapping review, has been described as like making mixed jam from lots of different fruits and then trying to pick out just the strawberries. In other words, you take lots of different pieces of research, different studies, you bring them all together into one thing, your mapping review, and then it's quite tricky sometimes saying, well, actually, I'm only going to pick out the strawberries. So with that health warning, but there is a safeguard, and that is that the protocol of a mapping review is strict, and the process is very transparent, so other researchers can look at what you've done, look at what you say the key points are and say, well, really? Or yes, we can see how you've arrived at that view. So the key themes identified regarding access are clearly interlinked, but the focus in this presentation is on the final point. But I'll just give you a moment just to look at those interlinking points. So in a way, I'm sure to many of you, nothing there is particularly surprising, really. I think the first point about the tensions between the knowledge cultures, I think that is important, and I think that's got implications for the final point, which clearly is the one that I'm focusing on now. And there's something perhaps about media and virtual networks that is more closely aligned to the oral approach to sharing knowledge as opposed to the text-based. And that might be an issue around the popularity of using that. And certainly the need for research to be recognisable and for this to be more likely when it is timely, in addressing a current active need, focused on student learning, involves inquiry into the everyday nature of their work, and is acknowledged by other teachers. Again, you can see that social media might be particularly powerful in creating that kind of context for accessing research. So to continue with the final point, attention needs to be paid to the influence of the popularising of evidence from research in the media and virtual networks. So that was highlighted in the included studies from the first phase of the mapping review. So turning to the second phase of the project that I'm using to illustrate teachers' access to research through social media. So the second phase then was to interview a group of practicing teachers. It was a purposive sample. So these were teachers who responded to an invitation through subject networks to participate in a project that was looking at teachers' engagement with research. So already positively predisposed to participate in such a project. So 16 teachers, 8 from the primary phase and 8 from the secondary phase. So primary phase in England is from 5 to 11, and the secondary phase is from 11 to 18. So they participated in semi-structured interviews. Because this was during the pandemic, these were done online via Teams. And what I've included on the slide here is what we learned from these interviews regarding their use of social media to access research. And interestingly, one of the key things was they used social media to find out about good books to read. So social media actually leads them to quite traditional media, a published book. They enjoyed the opportunity through Twitter, principally, to engage with different opinions and to debate issues that were impacting directly on them because of what was happening in schools. And they turned to it for support. It's also important, though, there were 16 teachers, but 7 teachers make no mention of social media at all. 3 were from the primary and 4 from the secondary phase. So on this slide, I wanted to look at those teachers who explicitly refer to social media in the interviews. What do they say about its use? The previous slide gave you an indication of the kind of the way they used it, but this is how they talked about using it. Now, it wasn't one of the questions. The interview schedule didn't have a question directly addressing the use of social media. In fact, the use of social media kind of emerged. We didn't anticipate it at the beginning of the project, but it emerged from the interviews themselves. So we hadn't asked them directly, do you use social media to access research? How do you use social media to access research? So we're interested in how they talk about it. What do they say? Now, this was, these quotes are taken from, different points in the interview, because it wasn't a direct question. When they talked about social media, it might have been at different stages in the interviews themselves. And in fact, some further work needs to be done to see not just what do they say, but when do they say it and in what connection, and how does this fit with particularly the thing that I mentioned earlier, how are they conceptualizing research at all in the first place? Again, I'll just give you time just to see the kinds of things that they're saying. Now, if we reflect back to the 2 papers that I selected to show something about what we might consider in terms of advantages and disadvantages, and I think if we now look at these quotes, we can see some issues there which resonate, and some concerns, things popping up in forums. I think a deeper analysis of social media would suggest that things don't just pop up, they're put there. And sometimes that might be generated within the community itself. There's a lot of interest in user-generated learning and user-generated knowledge, which highlights the equity and the empowering of using such media. But we also know that things are placed and pushed and influenced because of the way that algorithms drive what happens. And we're all familiar with trying to do a piece of academic work and suddenly up pops at the side in my case, a pair of shoes or a dress or something that I've been searching for using Google. And suddenly there it is. I'm reading the Times Higher Ed this morning, and up pops the fact that there's a sale of dresses somewhere. So we know that, you know, our behaviour is followed and used in this way. So things don't just pop up. And as educators, should we be a little bit more careful about thinking that it doesn't matter where and in what form you learn something? Does what you learn, is that not shaped by how you learn? And then the idea of virtual and real participation. The final point there, that there might be a lot of activity on these social media platforms, but actually getting grassroots local engagement to push forward issues and concerns is not so active. Now, obviously, at the moment, with the pandemic, without these virtual means, then there would be no coming together. But the fact that this observation that there's more activity, even when not in a pandemic, online than in real life, might start to be an issue of concern. So focusing on the impact of the pandemic for a moment, we've seen that it's increased the use of social media by teachers for their professional learning. And I've just selected there some recent publications. The first one in italics, now that's from one of the teachers interviewed, where actually her use of social media to access research had increased. In fact, before lockdown, it wasn't so much a feature of her professional learning, but during lockdown, it had become more so. And in a way, this was something that was enabling her to be more active in engaging with research. In a school context, when it's not lockdown, again, from the interviews, we could see that actually getting subject specific access to research was not as common as more generic professional learning around general issues around student learning, rather than anything about the curriculum. And so they found that useful, that they could pursue that through social media. And the OECD see this whole development in the use of technology as an extraordinary silver lining. And in fact, they talk about the fact that there's been this acceleration in the use of multiple modalities of collaboration and professional development using technology. This is something which is a bonus, and a lot of people have talked about the sudden acceleration and the transformation in the use of digital technology, which many people have been calling for, but was not perhaps as rapid as many people wanted it to be, that the pandemic has actually driven this forward. And certainly in my own university, there's a lot of discussion now around hybrid and blended forms of teaching and learning, where we use the positives of the recent experience to shape future practice. So it's had an enormous accelerating effect. But as I've tried to outline earlier in this short presentation, that we need to be alert to the fact that promoting access to research by teachers is key and very important, that removing barriers to that is beneficial. Social media has an ease and a speed, and has aspects which certainly promote equity, but also has some issues that need to be thought about carefully. And as with most things, is not an unalloyed neutral opportunity. So coming to the end of what I want to say today, the key thing, I think, is considering how we might maximise the advantages and minimise any disadvantages of engaging with research through social media. How can we promote a virtuous cycle where social media as a form of access can fulfill the opportunities to make research something that teachers can engage with, but at the same time encouraging the level of criticality and awareness and research literacy that enables teachers to engage in research and not be passive recipients of research pushed towards them through the social media platforms. So how can we realise this potential? I think we need to continue to be vigilant and raise awareness of how platforms drive interactions. Doesn't mean we need to avoid them. It just means that we need to be astute and aware of them. And I think there's a lot of ground on which to build with that. And maybe it's people of my generation who risk being more naive, perhaps, than younger people, although that wasn't particularly evident in our small sample of teachers. But awareness and perhaps thinking about the commercialisation of platforms. And I know there are movements to develop new platforms which are not part of these very big corporations. And I think within the professional communities of teachers, within the literature, they talk about the need to develop online communities of inquiry, and those can actually foster the attitudes and the insights to make professional learning networks very powerful. And again, the section in italics is a quote from one of our teachers, where you can see that on the ground there is a lot of scope. These things are evolving and developing within teacher professional groups and communities. So it's an awareness raising exercise, but it's also building on the foundations that are already there. And there you can see very encouraging signs of this virtuous circle that I was talking about. And people have talked about that what's needed really for teachers to access research is you need an ecology, a research ecology that actually has recognises the interrelationships and the way that we need to work collaboratively in community together, where different strengths and different interests can inform and enrich each other. So there's a lot of talk, at least in England, and I suspect across the world, that we will all learn great lessons from this pandemic and we will build back better. And certainly that's very powerfully expressed by the OECD. This acceleration brought on out of necessity in many cases gives an opportunity to deliver on the promises offered in the digital age. But the OECD point to the need for convincing strategies to build teachers' capacity, not just to use, but also to develop new tools. So I think, in conclusion, I'm arguing that using social media to access research is a growing phenomenon, and it's not good and it's not bad. It has elements which are promising and productive, but it's also got elements which could be disadvantageous. And we need to look carefully about how social media builds capacity, but also how social media might remove capacity and promote the former and limit the latter. And also, I think the idea that it's not just about using the tools, but actually developing new tools. And I've included that graphic because, as we all know, shiny technology may not always disrupt dominant models of teaching and learning. And just doing a search in Google Images for digital technology and teaching, and what do you find? You find a robot doing the teaching, but wearing a mortarboard. When did anybody last see a teacher teaching wearing a mortarboard? And lo and behold, pointing a stick at essentially a chalkboard on an easel, directly instructing some fairly basic information. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this very nice presentation, Professor Baumfield. It was very interesting for me as well, because I'm interested in continuing professional development for teachers and have teachers over here as well. And thank you indeed. So if the participants have any questions we would like to share with you, there is one question I think in Q&A section right at the bottom of the toolbar. If you can see it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. I think we'd all like the answer. Can everybody see the question? Thank you very much. Yeah, I think you're right. Acceleration is the key word. Transition period, how long do you think it will last? I think it's, as we would say in English, how long is a piece of string question. But yeah, thank you very much for that. Yeah.
So is there any question from the participants? I think there's no question, but if you let me, I can, yes, there's one more. You can, in the Q&A section, I think you can.
Yeah, I think that's pushing me to come up with my idea about how long it will last. I mean, I think what we've, I don't know how long it will last. But I do think, as in all disruptive experiences, I'm perhaps not wholly optimistic that we will automatically build back better. Human beings were not very good at learning from experience always. As Dewey would say, you don't learn directly from experience, you learn from experience mediated by others. So I think what we've got is the opportunity in community to actually share what we've learned about what matters and what we rely on. And I think community and social interaction is now recognised and valued more than ever. So I think the idea that we come together in community to look at what we want to do going forward. So I don't think we will come up necessarily with the right solutions, but we've got the foundations at the moment, I think, to value community more. And if we can actually take that, seize that opportunity and say, okay, how can we move forward together? I am an optimist about the capacity of us to come together and find workable solutions. I'm not overly optimistic that things will come from above, because I think that doesn't always happen, but I think we could push more for community.
Yeah. Thank you. There's a very nice complimentary message for you on the chat side. So from by Gülşah Öz. I think she or you know each other, maybe. Yeah.
Oh, that's very nice. Thank you.
Okay. I think there's no question, but I may raise a question as well. I'm interested in learning your opinions about when developing and designing the content of the digital content for the teachers, like the textbook. Mm-hmm. What do you think and what do you suggest for the authors who are interested in writing and developing this kind of the materials for the teachers?
Yeah, well, I think what would be useful there is the outcomes of the mapping review that I mentioned, the phase 1 of the project. I mean, I think that's a very useful resource in itself, because what we've got from that is we've distilled, if you like, some of the key factors about what drives teachers' interest in engaging with research and how to develop that. So, I mean, I do think this idea about having a balance between imparting immediately useful knowledge, but balancing that with a stimulus to question and to engage further. So an idea that it's not just here's the research and here is the distilled knowledge that you can pick up and take away. If it's just that, then I think it's a bit too inert, and it risks actually becoming kind of tips for teachers, which become overused, and the purpose and the intention can get distorted. But if you don't have things which are usable and immediately relevant, then it can appear to be too distant and not of interest. So so I think there's a balance to be struck between what I've written about elsewhere and I touched upon in this presentation, providing ease of access to what is already known. So imparting research in such a way that teachers can benefit from those insights and aren't condemned to, struggling with problems in the classroom, to which there are some well-researched, evidence-based ideas that could help them. I always remember a teacher I worked with years ago, meeting her in the school corridor and her shouting across to me, "I wish somebody told me years ago I could be a better teacher by reading a book." So it's not that people are not able to directly benefit from access, and digital technology will improve that access. But that access has to have within it the seeds of in a way, almost the seeds of its own destruction. It has to have the seeds of questioning. So here is my knowledge. I'm presenting it to you in an accessible way. But actually, I'm now going to subvert my own expertise by inviting you to criticize it. So I think it has to have both those elements within it. And I think the idea that if you're going to use digital resources, then I think you also need to create the community, the network of inquiry that engages with those resources. So you need to do both.
Yeah. I think there's one more other issue for the teachers and the digital content as well. So the COVID-19 pandemic was the opportunity for us developing the textbook digitally, written. But for the when it comes to teacher, having this the knowledge and experiences, like we call it the computer literacy and digital literacy. So what do you have what would you like to say about the digital literacy for the teachers? For example? What kind of skills they may need it?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on digital literacy. So yes, I'm sure, I mean, but other people are. And I think there is increasingly a drive to increase that. And I think a lot of us who were not particularly digitally literate before the pandemic have become so out of necessity. So I think that's what the OECD's driving at when they say this is an opportunity. It is a silver lining in all of this. The most reluctant people, I mean, I was not totally reluctant to engage, but not at the forefront. But even the most reluctant person now has become used to sharing their screen and remembering to unmute and all sorts of things. So I think that if we can build on that, that's a good opportunity. But yeah, but I think what I'm interested in that if we're going to use digital technology more, that is going to ease the speed and the accessibility of information and of research, but at the same time, there's going to be a real need to understand the form and what that's doing, the medium. It's an old, it was written about in the 1950s. The medium is the message. What we do digitally is not neutral. It's not the same as a book. It's different. And that means that there are things we need to be aware of. And I think in terms of digital literacy, it's not just how to use the technology, it's also understanding what the technology is and what it's doing to us as we engage with it. And what I'm particularly interested in from this recent work is the importance of research literacy, the importance of understanding that how to evaluate and understand different forms of research and different ways in which you can make claims. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And we have no question. I was waiting for someone else to raise another question. So thank you again. It was very nice to see you at Exeter Congress as a keynote speaker, and I promised to you that you would like to see you here in Turkey in person, and I know you had already made your arrangements for Turkey, and it's a promise of me having you here in person in the coming Exeter Congress.
Well, I hope some way or another, because of course once I'd received the invitation when it was going to be in person, I talked to Turkish friends and discovered what a beautiful place you are fortunate enough to live in. So I've only been to Istanbul, so I've got a lot of learning to do about Turkey.
Yeah. Which we are organizing the conference at the moment from Aksaray University. It is very close to Cappadocia. We would like to say it a lot. So it was the 1.5 hour drive from here. And okay, next time in person. So we would like to invite you again. It's a promise.
Well, thank you. And thank you very much for this opportunity. And I hope people found it useful. And you have my contact details. So if anyone wants to contact me, after this presentation. I'll be very happy to
You're
interact
always,
with
you're
people.
always welcome. And we have a certificate for you, but this is not in person, so it's a digital one. So I would like to share your certificate. So this is, that's it. This one, yes. Now it's on your screen, I think.
Oh, thank you.
Okay.
Oh, that is beautiful. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
That is a lovely idea. Yes.
This,
thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, and see you soon. And take care.
And you, and a very successful rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.